Now that we've looked at the different types of encryption, let's look at cryptographic attacks. With modern encryption being as strong as it is, that obviously then makes it very difficult to break. So a smart attacker will look for other ways that he or she could decrypt our data. That could be, for instance, stealing the private key. They don't need to break any encryption if they can just decrypt our message with the right key. An attacker would obviously have to gain access to your systems illegally, but if it's law enforcement, they can get a search warrant, then search your computer and find your private key. Our security is only as secure as the weakest link. In cryptography, that's often not the algorithm, but how we store the keys or where we store the keys. A brute force attack is what it sounds like. It's not a very smart attack. It uses the entire key space, every single key possible, and given enough time, any ciphertext can be decrypted. It starts with A. Is that the password? Then B, then C. Once it's been through all the letters and numbers and characters, then it starts with AA, AB, AC. So when I say it uses the entire key space, it tries every single possible combination. It takes a ton of time, as in hundreds or thousands of years at times, but it is the only known successful attack against any type of encryption. It's effective against any key-based ciphers except the one-time pad. It will actually eventually decrypt the one-time pad and show the real text, but at that point it might have thousands of hundreds of thousands of false positives, so we couldn't really tell which one was the right one. Key stressing is something we add on our side to prevent attackers from using brute force attacks. It adds 1-2 seconds time for each password verification. If an attacker has to use millions and millions of attempts to guess a password, us just adding that 1 second would make it unfeasible. They would try another attack vector. Remember the frequency analysis we talked about in the English language, where E appeared 12% of the times, and a digraph attack is very similar to that. But instead of looking for a single letter, it looks for pairs of letters. Common pairs in the English language could be TH, HE, IN, ER. But again, with salting and nonces, that rarely is a problem. A man-in-the-middle attack, or MITM, is also exactly what it sounds like. Someone sits in the middle of a legit conversation, and the two parties in the conversation think they're only talking to each other. For it to work well, the attacker has to be able to both send and receive from both parties. They can then change the information, steal it, or add completely new ones. In the example over here on the right, Bob and John think they're having a conversation, but Mike is in the middle, intercepting everything. They want to exchange something confidential, so Bob sends John a message, "Send me your key." But in actuality, he's sending it to Mike, who then forwards the request to John. John sends his public key to Mike. Mike holds on to that, places it with his own public key, and sends that to Bob. Bob, thinking he has John's public key, encrypts the message with that and sends it to Mike. Since the message in actuality was encrypted with Mike's key, he can now decrypt the message and read it. Mike can at this point just forward the message or change it, encrypt it with John's public key, send it to John, and both of them still have no idea what's going on. This is what a man-in-the-middle attack is. But what if Bob was sending John $1 million? All Mike would have to do is change the account number. He would now be $1 million richer. Session hijacking, or TCP session hijacking, is an attacker taking over a user's web session ID and masquerading as the authorized user. This is often done when session IDs are predictable. If an attacker intercepts session ID 3, then session ID 4, then session ID 5, then they can probably assume the next one is going to be 6. They can then take over the session and pretend to be you. And since the server on the other end thinks it's you, they have the same access rights that you would. It can be more complex than this, but this is the basics of it. This is how it functions. With cryptography, we know that it's always easier to steal the key than it is to break it. But often easier than that is to convince someone else to give it to you. Social engineering can be tremendously successful. People want to be helpful. People want to be nice. They don't want to get in trouble. So if you call from help desk saying you're seeing some problems on their system and you just need to give them your password so they can log in and check, many people do. People are used to doing what they're told. So if we haven't trained our staff, if we haven't raised their awareness, social engineering is very likely to succeed. There was a very successful social engineering attack done by a pen testing company where they drove up in front of a company office with a free ice cream sign, company logo, on an ice cream van. Employees then had to enter their username and password to prove they were real employees. They would then get an approved message and get their free ice cream. In less than half an hour, pen testers were able to get over 90% of the employees' usernames and passwords who had the location that day. Again, it had the company logo on there. It must be legit. Let's get our free ice cream. Luckily, this was a penetration test and not an attacker, but it's a very good example of how easy it is to get people to do what you want them to, even if they're giving up sensitive information. We touched briefly on rainbow tables earlier. Remember, it's a precompiled list of plain text and matching ciphertext. Most often it was used with passwords on one side and the matching hash on the other side, and there can be millions and millions of pairs. So if they capture the hash of my password, Thor is awesome, and we didn't use salting or nonces, they can compare it to their list and then figure out my password. And obviously, Thor is awesome would be in there. But when we talked about salting and nonces, we could see there were pretty easy ways we could render rainbow tables ineffective. A known plaintext attack is where we know the plaintext and we know the ciphertext, and we're trying to figure out the key that was used. Because if we have the key that was used, we can most likely reverse engineer all the other passwords as well. A chosen plaintext attack is very similar to a known plaintext, but in this case the attacker can choose the plaintext. They enter a password, they then get a new hash value, and they can do it multiple times, so they have more data to work from. Again, the object is to figure out the key. Read-in-the-middle attacks are more specialized. The attacker knows part of the plaintext and the ciphertext, but they need to break multiple ciphers. If you think back on triple DES, it's using the same encryption algorithm, but 3 different keys. So what the attacker does is break one key at a time, and then start over again. A known key attack is not exactly what it sounds like. If they knew the key, then they would have the key, it would be broken. But the attacker knows something about the key, making it easier for them to break it. This could be that the password is exactly 8 characters. Or the first character has to be an uppercase, the last have to be a number. The attacker has knowledge, even in a brute force attack, knowing that there's only 8 characters, and the first is a capital letter, and the last is a number, makes it much easier to break than if you didn't know the key. Differential cryptanalysis is where the attacker tries to find the difference between related plaintexts. If the plaintexts are only a few bits different, can we discern anything out from the ciphertext? Is there something we can see that's not random? If our encryption is done right, every single bit should have a 50-50 chance of flipping, so all the ciphertext should be completely random, but if it's not, then the attacker can use that. Linear cryptanalysis is a type of plaintext attack where the attacker has a ton of plaintext and ciphertext pairs, all created with the same key, and the attacker then studies the pairs to figure anything out about the key that was used to make the ciphertext. And then finally, differential linear cryptanalysis. It's the two combined, linear and differential cryptanalysis. We look for non-randomness, we know the plaintext is only a few bits off, and we have a ton of plaintext and ciphertext pairs, all created with the same key. A side-channel attack is when an attacker uses physical data to break into a crypto system. This could be CPU cycles, or power consumption while decrypting or encrypting. Depending on what type of encryption and how strong it is, it's going to take more CPU cycles. It's going to take more power when we encrypt and decrypt. So having access to that, the attacker can learn much more about what we have deployed. Implementation attacks are vulnerabilities we left behind when we implement an application, a system, or a service. It's always easier to find a flaw in the system than it is to break the cryptography. Did we store the key somewhere in plain text? Is the key stored somewhere where it's just not secure? Is it stored in memory? An attacker will think of all this. They'll look for it. And then in turn, we as IT security professionals need to make sure they can't. It's not there. Key clustering is when 2 different symmetric keys used on the same plaintext produce the same ciphertext. If you have a symmetric key you think is secure, and I've clustered mine with yours, I can decrypt anything you send without technically having your key.